Hey, and welcome to episode 39 of Feedback. We're really excited today to be talking with Enno Poppe and Nick DeMaison, both amazing musicians and fantastic people. Remember, if you have any questions, please email us at feedback@yarnwire.org or join in on the live chat on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll try to get to your questions if we can. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Russell. Enno, first, it's a real pleasure to meet you. I think I first got to hear your music at a composer portrait concert at Miller Theater, which I think Yarnwire did back in 2013, maybe?
Yeah, maybe 13, yeah.
So I guess the first question is for Yarnwire. That was quite some time ago. How did you get to know Enno's music, and what brings you back to his music?
If I could answer this one, I remember rifling through the record bin at Amoeba Records when I was in college, and I picked up some record from Donau Eschingen, and it had, I believe that's what it was, and it had Rod on it, which was the 2-keyboard piece, and I was young and impressionable, and that piece made a huge impact, and I was like, oh, what? Oh, this is great, so cool. And then, fast forward a bunch of years, and Yarnwire's getting going, and me, Ian, and Laura are hanging around. Laura and Jacob Rodebeck, our first pianist, our second pianist, they performed a piece on a concert, and then we're thinking about who it would be cool to play, and found this piece of Enno's, Tonband, right? And so together with Enno and Wolfgang Heiniger, we put on that Miller Theater concert, and I think we're going to revisit that concert and that piece on a later episode of Feedback, so we can talk with Wolf. And so that concert was super fun, and then I think at that concert we said to Enno, we should do something again someday, kind of tossed off, but also like secretly hoping it would happen. Right. And then we kept in touch, because it was such a great experience. And then the opportunity came through MPAC. RJO Ascani and MPAC helped commission this piece from Enno. We commissioned a new piece called Feld. And that's kind of the short version of the story. Basically, we fell in love with his music and got to work with him and wanted to keep going and make something new.
Yeah, great. So at that concert, the Miller Theater concert that I mentioned, I remember thinking, Enno, that your compositional language was totally unique, not something that I had come across before. And of course, we're having this interview because Yarnwire recently recorded Feld at MPAC, and that recording is coming out on the Vergo label this spring. But on the MPAC website, it says, quote, Enno Poppe describes his music as dented nature. So before we get into Feld specifically, can you talk about this idea of dented nature? Like what for you is nature, and what is the denting?
That's a hard question for starting, because I think that's a difficult one. So for sure, everything when we talk about music, it's metaphoric, because music is not, what you get in music is not always what you say about music. It's everything. It's a bit more complicated than what you're telling about it. So in fact, sure, music is a culture. Music is no nature. Music is always something what is highly culturist. But sure, I'm interested in nature, in process of nature. I was very much influenced by, like, for example, the book, The Algorithmic Beauty of Plants by Lindenmayer, where was a kind of computational analysis how plants are growing, how process in nature, what does it mean if animals or plants are growing. So that means what is the process in nature, and these processes, the research on and the looking at objects which are changing in time. That's something what happens in music all the time. So that was I was highly influenced by this kind of that's not really, that's no science, but it's kind of, it's looking very closely at phenomena. And I'm interested in phenomena like in the music, how, for example, the energy flows, how the music is built up from what, like, for example, little cells, like how comes the music, from where comes the music, and where does the music go. But sure, since the composing of music is not the same as a natural process, there's some denting, because I make the process. So on the one hand, I observe what happens with my musical material, but on the other hand, first I invent the material. The material is not outside me, so I put the material and I have the process in my hand. So that means, sure, at any point I can change the process, I can influence the process. So I'm the opposite from a scientist, who, if he would influence the process as I'm doing with my music, he would ruin his research. So I think that's that's a very simple answer to that question. So I'm interested in, when I'm observing processes, what is happening, for example, there's some simple rules. I work with some, for example, I have some algorithms, simple algorithms which would structure the process. Or I'm really interested in what happens to the algorithms themselves when the music is going on, and at some points that's really very interesting to get that information, that the processes themselves can, for example, collapse or come to an end, or go to somewhere where you lose completely the overview, that you just don't understand it anymore. And this in between, like starting something maybe very simple, like in the piece Feld, in the second movement of the piece Feld, where is something at the start is super simple, and you really get used to it. Maybe you have the idea this could be kind of a minimal music, but sure it isn't, because there's a process first under the surface of the music, and the more the process goes on, you can't go back. So at some point, because this is kind of recursive, can you say that in English? Mm-hmm. Like a recursion, that means you don't go back to the beginning, but you have always everything what already happened is part of the process. So the more the process goes on, the more everything changes to something completely different. And that's just interesting for me in music and in nature.
Can I, I want to listen to some of the piece, but before we do that, I wonder, I think a lot about how these days, and for the last maybe 75 years, there's no, we don't have a common language in music in the way that European classical music used to have a common language. And so every composer has, not just the opportunity to build a piece, but they also have this kind of responsibility to let the listener know what their language of the piece is while listening to the piece. And I wonder, do you, like you were talking about how you observe your own process, is that something do you picture yourself as a perfect observer for your music? Do you think about, an audience that may not have access to your process and how they hear the music?
Yes, exactly. I think that's the point. I don't know if I am the perfect observer. I think I have always in mind that people listen to music and they don't know what it's about. So I think first, in a way, I have to make something clear. So what is it about? That doesn't mean that it is necessarily so that the beginning is the most clear and the piece gets to the unclear. Can be the other way around. But I think if what I'm interested in, so I have, for example, I find something what I like, and I want to show that. So if I'm not able to show it, that why I like it, it's just the piece is not good, because that's communication. I want to communicate with people who listen to my music.
Oh, that's interesting. Maybe now's a good moment to listen to an excerpt from Feld. I made a little cut together of two sections of the music. The very beginning of the piece where there's some very fluid pianistic writing, and behind it is just this single tone in the vibraphone that keeps coming back. And I was really struck hearing that, the contrast between the voices, and then that seems to go away, but then later on in the piece it comes back. And so maybe this is for Rob. Could you play the Feld Measure 1 excerpt? So I think, there's something, when you hear a texture, that's bravo, by the way, Yarnwire, that sounds fantastic. When you hear a texture that's that busy, and in the middle of it is this single repeated, minor third, the C, E flat, it's really seductive. The ear really wants to grab onto it. And so I wonder if you could just talk about how you combine elements, or how these things interrelate with each other. That's not really a question, but maybe it's a prompt for you to discuss something about that.
I like the two examples because I never get that. That's exactly the same in the first movement and the second movement. That's the first time I have you're absolutely right with that. Sure, the two movements are very different, but at some points they come closer and less close to each other. I think that the second movement is very clear that it starts from very few material, only like repetitions of some seconds or some intervals, and the more it goes on, this just kind of more and more material that comes, like first in the beginning only short stuff, only pitches, in the middle of the same pitches, all plays have the same pitches, and it's kind of for composing very often it's a very easy when I'm thinking about the same, different, or similar, similar or different. That's kind of for what is the next element? Is that the same element? Is it a similar element, or is it a different element? So that makes the process of the music sometimes just sometimes I just know here I need something different, but it's not clear in the beginning or when I start composing or make a plan about the piece. What that can be. It's just clear it has to be different, but difference can be on all different levels. For example, I can have the same rhythm, but I can have absolutely different tone material. Just for example, the chords are loud, and at the edges of the piano we start from the middle, like that, and we have lots of possibilities with percussions and so on. And what I'm working with very often is starting with very, very simple, like cellular material. But when the piece is going on, it's not the composer who makes it, but it's the way of listening what makes it. That the longer the piece is, the more you get things which are in relationship to each other. That means, for example, if you play in the beginning only single notes, a plop, 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 the longer it goes, first you hear a rhythm, and second you hear a line. So the elements, the points, form the line just via time. So the time makes it that you get more and more coherence, and you get more and more relationships, and the more maybe the piece becomes more and more complex just because there are more and more relationships. Even of the most simple elements, you can create the most complex things just when the relationships are important. You know, there's some kind of music called complex music, but this is often not complex, but only complicated because you don't get the relationships. And I think the complexity results from that you get something. If you don't understand, or if you don't get that there are many relationships, it's only complicated. And that's the process what works. In the second movement, the first movement, I had just some decisions of choosing some really weird piano material. I just wanted to write for my whole life, so I won't do this never again. Like diminished chords. How do you call that? Diminished minor chords.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And like in cinema, the silent movie music.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, chromatic scales and clusters, black and white clusters. So like, the most simple piano material I wouldn't use normally. And I wanted just to pack all this weird piano stuff because I have kind of piano neurosis as I'm a composer. I'm a pianist myself, and I think it's always hard to write for piano. And I put all these reflexes, the piano reflexes, like playing all these tremolos. I had just to put that in, and that was interesting because I didn't know exactly how to relate all this found footage piano stuff to the rest of the piece, but I just throw that in, and I think it works in a way.
And I
It's
have
really
to
interesting.
say,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Russell.
I have to say, I'm so happy to hear you say that about those chords because
Yeah.
when we rehearse the piece,
We said exactly the same
we say
thing.
this, and we're like, which section should we go to? In a shortcut, we're like, you mean the twiddling the mustache section? Where there's like a guy over the train tracks going, yeah, I
The
got you.
villain,
See?
yeah.
It's great.
It is very evocative.
That brings up a really great point, Russell, actually. Like when you guys are working on a piece like this that's 17, 18 minutes long and weaves in and out of material that's like very similar but constantly changing, and at times is just blisteringly fast across the page. How do you guys think about, like what is your process for learning something like this? And it made me think that you must exist in some kind of semi-liminal, semi-conscious space where you're not exactly reading, but you're not exactly memorized. Is it really like relying on the mustache twiddle to get you through a certain page?
And there are different answers to that question depending on what part of the piece you're talking about. I feel like I think I know what you're talking about, and it's actually I think it's kind of the same way I remember feeling when I was learning and playing Bach fugues all the time, because it's like you can't read and play a Bach fugue all that well. You really need to, your muscles have to know it, your ears have to know the lines, all the voices that are happening. And so it does get to a point where you have the music memorized in some ways, but it's also in this music so complex that you still need some sort of visual cue as you're playing. So yeah, I think definitely there's a lot of physical memory involved. Like this music is very intensely physical for me, at least.
We rehearsed it for a really long time.
Yeah.
In order to get that physicality, and like that premiere, it's almost like it was a different piece, to be honest.
Yeah.
When you listen to the two different things. And I will say it was a rocky process for us because we didn't know how to approach it. I remember sending you an email, Enno, about like, what about a click track? Because that was a discussion that we had.
Yeah.
Like, do we need a click track to do this? And ultimately, we don't play with a click track. There is one that we can practice to if we need it, but it's like having a metronome essentially. Just it's a metronomic guide. And so we really just defaulted on the years of chamber music that we'd done, and work on cues. And just by playing, we played this piece a number of times, and by playing it a lot, we know it, like those Bach fugues. I know what to listen for now, even in like this dense thing. Like I know I call them melodies, because for me they're melodies that I latch onto, and rhythms and all these things. And so like it is that liminal space, actually. Like I'm reading the score, but if I don't hear like the 5/7 tuplet or whatever that Ian has going, I'm like, uh-oh, I'm lost again.
Yeah, right.
And so those are some great images of the recording process at MPAC. In the score, there's the marimba and vibraphone material that's specified, but there's also a good deal of percussion that is just open instrumentation. Can you talk about how you came to pick the instruments you chose and why, and that process?
Yeah, there's a set of guidelines at the beginning of the score. It's like wood, metal. Each instrument should have like a certain resonant characteristic or relationship to the others. So yeah, so Russell and I just kind of chose Russell's metals. I'm more woods, and I guess we all have metal, but yeah, choosing things that were like a family, but each had their own character, and then interacted well with the other setup. But it's a fun process.
I like that a lot, if that people have different instruments. So I really love writing for percussionists, especially because the players have different instruments, and the pieces sound very different when different people play my pieces. I wrote a drum set solo piece played by many different players. So different. So all the time it's just the same piece, but it's just, there's so many. I think that is very personal. The way of percussionists choose the instrument, that has so much to do with what they like, what they are, how they play. So just like the size of the instruments is different, because some like more big movements and some like more small movements. So they choose the smaller instruments, and that's just interesting. And I think this freedom is important for me in composing, that I can just I know that I can't imagine everything. So I can't sit at home and imagine the whole sound world of what is in my piece. But I think there are lots of things I just know when I heard the piece first. I just one thing to what you asked before. I think for me this aspect of this corporal aspect, or the physical aspect of the bodies, that's very important for me when I'm writing the pieces. I think all the rhythms come through my body. So when I'm composing, I'm normally very loud, because I play all the rhythms on the table, or I sing all the stuff. I really like to have this the feeling that the physical, what the people are doing, that makes some sense in a way, that just it works for the bodies.
I was gonna save this for the end, but since you mentioned the relationship of body to composing, maybe we could jump to that YouTube clip that I passed along, Rob. This is Enno with it's with your ensemble Mosaic, performing.
We don't have that queued up yet, so Rob will get it at some point.
Okay, well, I think Rob, maybe like bring that gong in when you have it queued up, and we'll know that we're ready to go. This idea of so you are a composer and a conductor, and you have this ensemble that you've worked with for a very long time, and you know these people very well and their tendencies very well, and your relationship to them is not of a sound maker, but a sound signaler. I wonder if you could speak more about that physicality and both the physicality and the way of understanding people physically.
I don't know if I understand everything. I just have an imagination of people doing things. So I'm sure that I have no real idea of what a trumpet player is doing with that mouth, because how a trombone works, that's really complicated to understand. But sure, I really like to, when I'm writing the piece, first to imagine the people who are playing it. It's easier to write pieces for people I know very well, because I can imagine what they are doing. But on the other hand, you never can really imagine. So I think every composer who tells you that he can imagine the whole piece when he has his score. He's just lying, or he just has no. He just too stupid to get what it is. Like, for example, you have a violin and you write one pitch for the violin, and on the sheet it's just nothing. It's just one pitch. But what happens with the bow and the finger and all these, all that is so interesting, and you can. If you realize what happens, you can go so much farther. It's not about being virtuosic, but it's more just about intensity. It's about expression, expressiveness. And I think that for me, all music is expressive. And the expression of music has always much to do with the physicality of the players. And if I forget that while I'm writing the piece, I will never come to that expressivity.
Okay. Let me jump around to something else then. Let's actually, since we're talking about Feld, let's go back to Feld. So the piece is structured in 2 movements, and I hope I'm not going to totally throw Rob off if I ask for the other clip that I had posted.
It's all good.
The measure 162. And so even though this piece is in 2 movements, there's a clear connection as we transition between the movements about the ideas in the first movement and the second movement. So maybe we could just listen to that.
Well, I think what's really interesting in this clip that you really got very clearly the percussion 1, percussion 2 with the metal instrument that was so different. Just that the 2 guys, the 2 percussionists, they choose so different instruments. That's absolutely interesting. The one has the more resonant, the other one was more like clink, 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 very, very dry. And I think that's fine. And that makes absolute sense.
So you divide the piece into 2 movements, and when we arrive, there's this clear, very clear process that's happening from movement 1 into movement 2. And then when we arrive in movement 2, it's like we've been dropped into a different landscape, even though it feels like a natural arrival. And I have the sense that there's a kind of like game of memory that's happening, like how long can you remember the process that got us to being inside of movement 2? And then I also noticed that you wrote the piece both in 2007 and 2017. Could you talk about that compositional framework? Like why did you start in 2007? What was that 10-year gap about? And did your memory of what you had done 10 years earlier have a big effect on what you were writing?
Yeah, I think that's very clear and very easy to get that. The first movement is written in 2007, but first that was completely different piece because it was part of an opera, and that was kind of a chamber opera where there was a piano on stage, and there was all the singers, and the percussionists and all the orchestra musicians, they were on stage and running around the piano and playing all those chromatic scales, and it becomes easier and easier, because for the singers that was very easy. And some of them, the stuff was with singers, but for sure the piece was a lot change. I was changing this piece a lot. So it's when I wrote Feld, this was just the starting point. So I rewrote the whole piece. But sure, I started in 2017 writing the second movement, and first I thought I write only this piece. And I started with that, so that what you showed, that the first movement comes into the second, that was much later, because I just started with the second movement, and first I thought maybe I just start this process with this ding, 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 this like a bit minimalistic process with I start this and let it go and just be in the flow. That is the Feld music, that's my Feldman homage. That was this music. And I don't know exactly at what point I thought I would be interested to make the other one and combine the two. So maybe just, I thought for a beginning, it wouldn't be enough. Just like, I like this much more for, this absolutely calm and non-directional Feld, that's, what's the word Feld in English? Like
Field.
What? Feel like, sure.
Field, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This field, like where there's no direction, the music just goes and, it stays. I think it stays for 10 minutes without any development. And afterwards it develops to something really super high energy, or maybe 8 minutes without development. And so I thought at some point when I just was hanging around into this field, I would like to have more in the beginning, so I can show a lot of stuff. Just I put all my piano neuroses first, and I can show all the percussion instruments first, and then I go down, and then I can open it again, and all what comes in the end of Feld 2, that is all. Everything has been there already in the first movement and at some point. So I think memory could work very well. I think especially for like the piano instruments, the percussion instruments, like clusters or like material, what you really don't expect when the second movement starts, like your Feldman piece.
Mm-hmm. That's funny. I'm glad you mentioned the Feldman connection. I didn't want to insinuate that there is a Feldman-y quality to some of the repetition. So you guys recorded this at MPAC. MPAC is a very nice building.
Yeah.
You guys have worked there a lot. Does that working in a space like that influence the way you think? Like as you're preparing, you're going to record an MPAC. Does that influence how you think about what you're doing?
I think the residency structure impacted, like, because in order to, as part of the commission of this piece was the premiere, right? That was kind of a package with MPAC. And so it gave us a framework in which, like, okay, we're going to get this ready for performance. And originally the plan was that we would record Feld and Tonband at the end of the residency, which was a week long. And before we got into it, we're like, yeah, that's enough time. And then we get Feld and we're like, oh man, we have no time. And so that was crazy. And they were really wonderful in that we managed to record Tonband only and then push back the recording of Feld much later. We needed the time after that premiere to really
was really hard for me, because I think I didn't hear my piece for 2 years because you didn't send me a recording,
That's right.
It's not because the piece is, unless I listen to it, it's not finished. I felt like really you just left me alone with that.
Sorry.
Yeah,
that's what you get for writing something so difficult.
Yeah, it's my fault. I'm sorry.
I know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, going into MPAC, we were really lucky. So we knew we were going to get a good recording if we could play it. And it was kind of dependent on us and their structure where they give you the time and the freedom to do it was really cool. The only thing, I mean, kind of Enno was alluding to it a little bit. The only thing that I wish would have been different is there were circumstances around travel that, like, you know, we couldn't all be working in the same room at the same time. Kind of similar to how things are now. So, but, you know.
Yeah.
And Enno, do you think about spaces that, like, if you knew they were going to be doing this at MPAC, do you think about spaces where music is happening as you're composing?
It depends. I think this is for me kind of a chamber piece, and I didn't think so much here because it's kind of, you know, the pianos are just the pianos. No, I think we're in this case, no. And in fact, I didn't know Ampeg, so I couldn't know anything about it in advance.
Okay. Well, I think my last question for you is one that I personally am dying to ask. And apologies, Yarnwire, this is totally unrelated to you, but you are a composer and conductor, and I am a composer and conductor. And people ask me all the time about if my practice of one influences my thinking or my work in the other. And you know, I've read lots of composer conductors' writings about how they think about it. So I'm very curious, how do you think about it? How do these two practices inform each other for you?
So I think first, both are super important for me. You know, the composing is a very lonely business, and I just love working with people. So I really need that to come from my studio and go and just do things with other people and working on music. And, you know, it's just the sounds. You can't always just imagine all the sounds when you're at home. I think being with people and working on something is just great. The second, you know, I really don't like to work so much on my own music as a conductor, because I'm dealing with my own music all the time. So I think just the taking of different point of views, working with other composers, learning other ideas, that maybe doesn't influence me in a way that I compose like the composers I perform, but I'm interested in all this. So in the way that I can never write all the pieces I would like to write in my life, I'm absolutely clear about this, because I would like to compose so many pieces, it's just impossible. And it's just great sometimes for some ideas that other people have these ideas and other people write the pieces, and I'm just part of the process. I really I prefer working with living composers. I don't perform pieces of dead people. That's not my business, you know, because I really like developing things. I really love to work with composers before they write the pieces, or being in the process of composing pieces and doing some experiments. And that's for me always the most interesting, just to be part of some creative process.
Thank you. So Russell, you gave me a 45-minute time frame. We're coming right up on 45 minutes. So I just want to say thank you so much to Enno and to Yarnwire. And the album is coming out on Vergo when?
Well, the date is TBD, but sometime this calendar year. And yeah, thanks, Nick, and thanks, Enno, for joining us today. We will be rescheduling another talk with Enno and Wolfgang Heinegger and Nick to talk about Tonband and a piece that Wolfgang wrote, Neumond, in the future. So stay tuned for that. And if you want to stay informed about future episodes, please remember to subscribe to our channel. And you can also support this project and other things that we do via Patreon. Our next feedback episode is going to be on March 18th with Rick Burkhart, talking about his piece Earth Opens. Next week, we're going to have another preview episode with Victoria Che on her new work for us that we'll be recording later this spring. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks. So good to see you all.
Awesome to see you.
Yeah.